Hello. So, chapter 5 was about shifting boundaries, expansion, reform, and the Civil War. And it goes over a bunch of different topics, especially about migration west for a lot of the white men and women and its effects on indigenous and Hispanics. Then it talks about the gold rush, and then later about antebellum reform, uh, new women's rights starting to emerge. Family and sexual reformation, and then moves on to the Civil War, the women's involvement in the war, and emancipation, and basically just talks about how boundaries are getting reshaped and womanhood's being redefined during during the period between about 1840 to 1865. Our discussion board post was primarily about the migration west. And the expansion to the west had a lot of different effects on the local indigenous and Hispanic people. Dubois, in Through Women's Eyes, gives a really interesting statement when she says that the different migrant groups and the native people they came upon each other with various different combinations of curiosity, hospitality, alliance, but then exploitation and violence. And my initial thought was that it would be just pure slaughter, kind of like how the colonials did when they first landed in America. However, among that conflict, there was some cooperation. But unfortunately, many of the indigenous people there were just terrified of the migrants. They heard all these stories about how the migrants would kill the indigenous people and eat them. And Dubois talks about how there was a Paiute woman named Sarah Winnemucca, and talking about how when the men were away from camp, and a group of migrants came by, the women had to hide the children. They buried the children in mud and put bushes over them, and just because they were terrified of what the migrants were going to do to them. Winnemucca's mother was also really afraid that her sister, who was good looking, would be sexually abused or endangered by these men. And over time, the fertility of the indigenous women was dramatically reduced due to all these sexual assaults from the American men, along with the disease all the sexually transmitted diseases that they transmitted to these poor women. As far as the Hispanic indigenous people, especially those in California, they also suffered from migration through loss of land and womanhood status. Dubois talks about this when she talks about the difference between Mexican and American law, and she said how while Mexican law gave married women more control over their property than the U.S. law did, it did not protect them from the loss of wealth and standing that they had along with their men once California was absorbed into the United States. So when California did become a state in 1850, lawmakers did try to keep some of the advantages that married women had, but just over time, those laws were rewritten, were reinterpreted, were reimagined, and they made all these changes to fit more of an American standard where husbands were favored over the wives instead. And through these examples of just one section of this reading, it shows how American history just continues to repeat in pattern when it comes to expansion and land encroachment. And while the text gives less examples of direct violence compared to the original colonials, women still continued to suffer sexually, mentally, and territorially during this period. So it was a very interesting read, and especially the part on the discussion board that we did our post about regarding the encroachment and its effect on women was very thought provoking. So it was a good educational read. Thank you.